The fluorescent lights in courtroom 3B felt like they were burning holes through my skull as I sat there, watching my husband, David, lean back in his chair with that smug, confident smile I'd grown to, despite 3 years of marriage. And I was finally seeing him for who he really was. Your Honor, David's lawyer, Marcus Cole, stood up. His suit was expensive, his hair slicked back, his voice smooth as oil. My client has been more than patient. Mrs. Alleron, he used my last name with a sneer, though I'd kept my maiden name, Navarro, for my business has been trying to hide assets and deny my client his rightful share. I felt my stomach twist. His rightful share. Judge Patricia Henley, a stern woman in her late 52s with silver hair and a tight bun, looked over her glasses. Mr. Cole, please present your client's final demands. David stood up slowly, and I saw that familiar gleam in his eyes, the same one he got when he was about to close a big deal. Except this time, I was the deal. Your Honor. His voice was deep, reasonable, filling the silent room. California is a community property state. I'm simply asking for what is legally mine, half of everything acquired during our marriage. He turned, his eyes locking on mine. And that's when the mask of the charming husband dissolved into something cold and triumphant. That includes half of Elena's biotech company, Alleron Diagnostics, which is now valued at approximately $20 million. It also includes half of her grandmother's estate, which she inherited 2 years ago, another $10 million in properties and art. My hands clenched into fists under the table. My grandmother Sophia's estate, the woman who had raised me, who had taught me that independence was a woman's greatest armor. He wanted to take half of her legacy, too. But then David did something that made my blood run cold. He started to laugh. It wasn't a small chuckle. It was a loud, arrogant laugh that echoed off the wooden walls. I mean, come on, he said, looking around the gallery like he was performing. I'm taking half her millions, including her grandmother's estate, and there's nothing she can do about it. The law's on my side. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Me lavier. Jenna muttered a curse under her breath. Judge Henley banged her gavel. Order. Order in my courtroom. But David just shook his head, still grinning. Sorry, Your Honor, but this is just too easy. I married well. Didn't I? That's when something inside me snapped. Not anger. I was beyond anger. It was a cold, sharp calm. I had listened to him lie, watched him paint me as a greedy wife, watched him try to steal my grandmother's memory. But I had something he didn't know about. I stood up slowly. The courtroom went silent. David's laughter died on his lips. I reached into my purse and pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope. My heels clicked on the floor as I walked to the bench. I could feel his eyes burning into my back. I handed the envelope to Judge Henley. My hands were perfectly steady. Your Honor, I said, my voice clear and strong. I think you need to see this. Judge Henley took the envelope, her eyebrows raised. She opened it and began to read. I watched her face. It went from confusion to sharp surprise, to something that looked almost amused. She looked up at David, then back at the papers, and then Judge Patricia Henley did something I never thought I'd see. She burst out laughing. 3 years earlier, I was living a fairy tale. It was October 15th. At the Children's Hospital Charity Gala. I remember the date because it was 1 week after my first health tech app, Cardio Read. It had been acquired by a major medical device company for $3 million. At 28, my dreams were finally coming true. I was standing by the silent auction table when someone tapped my shoulder. Excuse me, aren't you Elena Navarro? The developer who just made the cover of Health Tech Weekly. I turned, and my breath caught. The man was tall, with dark, perfectly styled hair, and a smile that belonged on a magazine cover. He wore a bespoke navy suit that screamed old money. "That's me," I said, trying not to blush. He laughed. A varm, genuine sound that was nothing like the laugh I'd hear in that courtroom. "David Alleron," he said, extending his hand. "I'm a wealth manager at Sterling Group. I've been following your company's progress for months. What you've built is incredible." His eyes were a deep, arresting green. And when he looked at me, it felt like I was the only person in the room. "You've been following my little app?" I asked, surprised. "Are you kidding? You've revolutionized remote heart monitoring. My own uncle uses your app. He didn't just praise the money, he praised the work. Most men I met were either threatened by my success or bored by the technical details." David seemed genuinely impressed. We spent the entire night talking. He told me about his work, about his dream of starting his own firm. I told him about my plans for my next venture, a platform for predictive diagnostics. "You know what I love," he said, as we waited for our cars. "You're not just in it for the money. You actually care about saving lives." When he asked for my number, I didn't hesitate to. Our first date was 4 hours long. I told him things I'd never told anyone about my parents' death, about being raised by my grandmother Sophia, about my fear that my success was just a fluke. "Elena," he said, taking my hand across the table, "what you've accomplished isn't luck. You're brilliant. Don't ever let anyone make you think otherwise." The next 8 months were a blur. He sent flowers to my lab. He bragged about me to his colleagues. He even learned basic medical terminology to understand my research. When my second company, Alleron Diagnostics, started gaining traction, he was my biggest cheerleader. On our 8-month anniversary, at the same charity gala, he got down on one knee. "Elena Navarro," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've made me believe in dreams again. Will you marry me and let me spend the rest of my life supporting yours?" Through happy tears, I said yes. I thought I was the luckiest woman alive. I had no idea I was the next target. 2 years into our marriage, I should have been the happiest woman alive. Alleron Diagnostics had just secured Series B funding, pushing our valuation to an unbelievable $20 million. David seemed thrilled. He popped champagne, toasted my genius wife, and bragged to everyone at dinner parties about how proud he was. But something subtle had changed. When he looked at me, his eyes lingered, and it didn't feel like adoration. It felt like calculation. Then, 3 months later, my world shifted. My grandmother Sophia passed away peacefully in her sleep. My grief was a heavy cloak. She had been my rock, my true north. At the will reading, I was stunned. Grandma Sophia had left me everything: her beautiful Victorian house in Pacific Heights, 2 rental properties, and her entire collection of art and antiques, totaling another $10 million. I cried for hours, clutching the pearls she'd left me. When I told David, his reaction was strange. He was quiet for a long time, his face pale. "Elena, 10 million, he whispered. "That's incredible. But it's exposed." "What do you mean?" I asked, wiping my eyes. It's a lot of new assets. We need to protect it. For you." He seemed genuinely, deeply concerned. "We should put it all into a protected trust. Immediately. Just in your name. To keep it safe. Separate from our other finances. From any liability from my work. I wouldn't want anyone to ever touch your grandmother's legacy." I looked at him, my heart swelling with gratitude. Even in my grief, he was thinking of protecting me. "Oh, David." "No," I said, taking his hand. "Don't be silly. We're a team. What's mine is yours. We share everything. That's what marriage is. I trust you." It was like a switch flipped behind his eyes. The concern vanished, replaced by that familiar, hungry gleam I'd seen in the courtroom. A slow, wide smile spread across his face. "You're right," he said, his voice suddenly energetic. "You're absolutely right. We're set for life." From that day, the man I married disappeared. He immediately convinced me to add his name to the new inheritance, accounts for tax purposes and ease of management. "Babe, you're a biotech genius," he'd say. "But this financial stuff is my world. Let me handle the boring parts. Let me take this burden off your shoulders while you're grieving." The spending started almost immediately. A $70,000 sports car appeared in our driveway. New watches arrived weekly. He'd come home with designer suits, claiming they were necessary for the new client tier. But it was all coming from my accounts. When I questioned him, he'd get defensive. "Elena, I'm not some charity case. We're married. What's yours is mine. Remember, I'm building our brand. We have to look the part. Don't you want your husband to look successful?" I found business cards in his jacket, high-asset divorce specialists. When I confronted him, he laughed it off. "Babe, you're being paranoid. With this much money, we need planning. Estate planning, I'm looking out for us." He made me feel foolish, small, and untrusting, for even asking. The final straw came when he demanded I make him a partner in Aileron Diagnostics. When I refused, his rage was terrifying. "I've been supporting your dreams for 3 years," he yelled. "I've earned the right to be more than just your cheerleader." The man I loved was gone, replaced by someone who looked at me like I was a stock portfolio he was ready to liquidate. The truth hit me on a rainy Tuesday. I'd been working late and decided to surprise David at his office with his favorite Thai food. The receptionist waved me through. "He's in conference room B. Mrs. Aileron. I'm sure he'll be thrilled to see you." I walked down the hall, smiling, excited for a moment of normalcy. The conference room had glass walls. David was inside. But he wasn't in a meeting. He had his colleague, Sarah, a stunning analyst, pressed against the conference table. His hands were tangled in her hair, and he was kissing her like his life depended on it. It wasn't a mistake. It was practice. The casual, familiar way she laughed and ran her hands down his chest. This had been going on for a long time. I stood there, frozen. The bag of food slipped from my fingers, crashing to the floor. The sound of plastic containers and curry echoed in the silent hallway. David's head snapped up. Our eyes met through the glass. He saw panic, then annoyance. I turned and ran. I made it to my car before the sobs hit. Great. Heaving gasps that stole my breath. It was all a lie. The man who'd supported my dreams, who'd learned medical terms for me, who'd proposed at the gala, he didn't exist. He came home that evening acting like nothing had happened. He walked into the kitchen, loosened his tie, and leaned in to kiss my cheek. I flinched away. "Hey, babe," he said, his voice casual. "You look tired." I stared at him, my heart a cold, dead stone. "I saw you today, David, with Sarah." He didn't even have the decency to look guilty. He sighed, sitting down at the kitchen island, as if we were discussing the weather. "Elena, you're overreacting. Sarah and I work closely. Things get complicated." Complicated, my voice cracked. "You were kissing her." "I love you," he said, his tone flat, mechanical. "Sarah just. She understands the pressure I'm under. You're always so busy with your company. A man has needs." The casual cruelty of it, blaming my work for his betrayal, sucked the air from my lungs. So this is my fault. His mask of the loving husband finally slipped. His face went cold. Calculating. "Look, Elena, let's be honest. This marriage has been a great investment. You got a husband who supported your career. And I got..." "You got what?" David, my money. He stood up and poured himself a glass of wine. I've invested 3 years of my life in this relationship. In your success. I've been the cheerleader. I think I've earned some compensation for that. Compensation, I whispered. The horror dawning. You're worth over $30 million now. Elena, I've been a part of building this life. I deserve my fair share. Your fair share of my inheritance, of my company. He took a slow sip of wine. His eyes mocking me. California is a community property state. Babe, what's acquired during marriage gets split, 50/50. It wasn't a confession. It was a declaration of war. He had planned this all along. The divorce papers arrived on a Thursday. They were delivered by a courier who looked at me with pity as he handed over the thick manila envelope. I'd been expecting them ever since David moved out and into what I now knew was Sarah's downtown condo. But seeing Aileron in bold black letters, still felt like a punch to the gut. He had hired Marcus Cole. When I told my lawyer, Jenna, her face went pale. Cole is a shark. Elena, she said, closing her office door. He's not a family lawyer. He's a corporate liquidator. He's famous for destroying wealthy women in court. The demands laid out in the filing were breathtaking in their audacity. He wanted half of Aileron Diagnostics, valued at $20 million. He wanted half of my grandmother's $10 million estate. He wanted half of all assets. My investment accounts. My car. Even my grandmother's antique art collection. But the real poison was in the narrative. According to the filing, David had been the supportive spouse who sacrificed his own career advancement to help build our marital estate. They claimed he'd provided crucial business guidance that directly led to my success. They argued my company only became profitable because of his investment expertise. It was all lies. But they were wrapped in legal language that made them sound horrifyingly plausible. The most dangerous part, Jenna warned me, is the inheritance claim. Normally, inheritances are separate property, but they're arguing that since he helped manage those properties, he commingled his efforts with the assets, which entitles him to half. He never managed anything, I protested. He just hired a decorator for the house. I know that. And you know that? Yenna said, her face grim. But Cole is a master at creating narratives for judges who don't know the real story. The depositions were a nightmare. Marcus Cole grilled me for 8 hours. His voice a relentless, condescending drone. He twisted every conversation, every dinner party, every word of gratitude I'd ever expressed. Isn't it true, Mrs. Aileron, that your husband's connections in the financial world helped you secure your Series B funding? No, that's not true. Our valuation secured the funding. But didn't your husband arrange the initial meeting with the VC firm? Didn't he facilitate that connection? He introduced us at a party. But, so you admit, he facilitated the connection that led to your most profitable contract. It went on like that for hours. Him building a mountain of lies from tiny grains of truth. Meanwhile, David played his part perfectly. During his deposition, he was the picture of the devoted, heartbroken husband. I could have started my own firm years ago, he said, dabbing at his eyes with a tissue. But Elena, she needed me. Her business was growing so fast. She was overwhelmed. I spent countless nights helping her strategize, making connections. I believed we were building something together. When Cole asked about the inheritance, David's performance was Oscar-worthy. Sophia was like a grandmother to me. Too, he said, his voice thick. I spent holidays with her. I helped Elena manage the properties after she passed. I even coordinated the renovations on the Pacific Heights house that increased its value by $600. Ling, ling, ling. It was all I could do not to scream. He'd hired contractors with my money and was now claiming it as his own labor. Jenna, we have to fight back, I pleaded in her office, feeling the walls close in. We have to show them who he really is. I want to hire a private investigator. Yenna said, her tone serious. I recoiled. A PI? No. Absolutely not. I felt a strange wave of guilt. Of shame. Jenna. That's vindictive. It'll make me look as bad as him. He's already painting me as a monster. I just want this to be over. I'll give him some money. Whatever it takes. Elena. He won't stop at some money. He wants half. Jenna argued. No. No PIs. I said. My voice final. I was scared. And I felt a bizarre, lingering loyalty. A desire not to stoop to what I assumed was his level. We'll fight him on the facts. Jenna looked disappointed. But she nodded. It's your call. Elena. But you're trying to fight a shark with a restraining order. That was my misstep. And it almost cost me everything. A week later, I got a call from my bank. Mrs. Alaron, this is Mark at the Wealth Management Division. We're calling to confirm a wire transfer of $50, 000 from your personal, non-commingled account. The one you've had since before your marriage. My blood went cold. I didn't authorize any transfer. That's what we thought, Mark said, his voice tight. The transfer was initiated online. Set to go to a new LLC we've never seen before. Alaron Future Holdings. We've flagged it and frozen the account. But, Elena. The password he used was Sophia1945. Your grandmother's birth year. I hung up the phone. My hands shaking so badly I dropped it. He hadn't just commingled. He was actively stealing. The $50, 000, was a test. If it went through, he'd have drained the account. He was trying to take the one thing that wasn't even on the table. The fear and guilt vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp rage. I called Jenna. You were right, I said, my voice shaking with fury. Hire the PI. Hire the best one you can find. I want to know what Alaron Future Holdings is. And I want to know everything. The next day, I met Mrs. Keen. She looked nothing like a PI. She was a small woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and graying hair, looking more like a librarian than a bloodhound. I'll need access to everything, she said, her voice soft but precise. Bank records, credit reports, employment history, everything you remember about his past. For 2 weeks, Mrs. Keen worked. She traced his employment history back 10 years, interviewed former colleagues, and ran deep background checks in 3 different states. I tried to focus on the case, but I was terrified, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Then, on a Friday, Mrs. Keen called Jenna. You need to see this, she said. Both of you. Now. We met at Jenna's office that evening. The conference table was covered in documents, spread out like a grim puzzle. David Alaron, or whatever his name is, has done this twice before. Mrs. Keen announced without preamble. She pointed to a photograph of a beautiful blonde woman. Meet Jennifer Walsh, tech executive from Seattle. Married David in 2018. Divorced in 2019. She was worth $12 million when they met. $4 million when they divorced. My hands started shaking. What happened to the other $8 million? David happened, Keen said grimly. He convinced her to add his name to her business accounts. Just like he did with you. Then he systematically drained them while building a legal case that he deserved half for emotional distress and career sacrifice. She slid another photo across the table. A brunette with sad, haunted eyes. Lisa Chen. Pharmaceutical heiress from Portland. Married David in 2016. Divorced in 2017. She inherited $20 million during their marriage. He took $10 million, I whispered, the pattern sickeningly clear. $12 million. Keene corrected. His half, plus compensation for her workaholic tendencies. Jenna was furiously taking notes. How did he get away with it? Why didn't anyone connect the dots? He's smart, Keene said. Changes cities. Changes his approach just enough. And he targets women who are too successful, too busy, and, frankly, too trusting. But Mrs. Keene wasn't finished. She pulled out a thick folder. The one I'd asked her to investigate. Now, for Aileron Future Holdings. David hasn't just been stealing from you, Elena. He's been actively embezzling from your company for the last 18 months. She spread out bank statements, transaction records, $2.3 million. She said, tapping the total. Moved through a series of shell companies, all controlled by David and Sarah. Sarah's involved, I gasped, up to her neck. She's been helping him launder the money through fake consulting fees. They've been planning this for over a year. And then, Keene delivered the final, devastating blow. The misstep that had cost him everything. That $50,000 transfer he attempted. From your grandmother's account, that LLC he was sending it to. Aileron Future Holdings. Yes, it's a shell company. All right, but it's not owned by him. It's owned by another PI, a man named Thomas Gallo. I ran Gallo's invoices. David hired him 3.5 years ago. 1 week after Health Tech Weekly published that article about you. I stared at her, not understanding. Elena. Yenna said, her voice soft. He was paying Gallo off. This was the final payment. David didn't meet you at that gala by chance. He targeted you. He'd been investigating you for months before you ever laid eyes on him. This was never a marriage. It was a long con. The room spun. The romance. The shared dreams. The supportive husband. All of it. A script. A performance. Jenna looked up from her notes. And for the first time in months, she smiled. A cold, sharp, terrifying smile. Elena, she said, we don't just have a defense anymore. We have a nuclear weapon. We put everything into that manila envelope. The bank records, the embezzlement trail, the proof of the shell companies, the sworn affidavits from the private investigators in Seattle and Portland, and finally, the invoice from Thomas Gallo, dated before I even knew David's name. The silence in the courtroom was deafening as Judge Henley finished reading the last page. Trevor's face was the color of old newspaper. His lawyer, Marcus Cole, was frantically whispering in his ear. But David looked frozen, his eyes wide. Judge Henley set the papers down and slowly removed her glasses. The amusement was gone, replaced by an anger so cold it chilled the entire room. Mr. Cole, she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. I suggest you advise your client to remain silent for what I am about to say. She turned her gaze on David. He physically shrank in his chair. Mr. Aileron, in 30 years on this bench, I have seen greed, betrayal, and marital misconduct. But what I am holding in my hands represents one of the most calculated, predatory, and cruel schemes I have ever encountered. She held up the first document. This is a detailed financial investigation showing you have systematically embezzled $2.3 million from your wife's company over the last 18 months. Funds you moved through shell companies controlled by you and your mistress, Sarah Jenkins. David's mouth opened and closed. Your Honor, I can explain. You will remain silent. Judge Henley's voice boomed. I am not finished. This investigation also reveals you have committed this exact same fraud against 2 previous wives, Jennifer Walsh of Seattle and Lisa Chen of Portland. Both successful women. Both left financially devastated by your predatory actions. The gallery gasped. Oh my God, someone whispered. Furthermore, the judge continued. Your accomplice, Miss Jenkins, is currently being arrested at her workplace as we speak. But the worst part, Mr. Alaron, the most damning evidence, is this? She held up the PI's invoice. Proof that you hired an investigator to target Mrs. Life. Aileron before you ever met her. Proving, beyond any doubt, your intent to defraud from the very beginning. Trevor's face went from pale to green. Judge Henley stood up, her black robes making her look like an avenging angel. Mr. Alaron, not only will you receive nothing from this divorce, but you are hereby ordered to pay Mrs. Navarro restitution in the amount of $2, $3 million for the funds you stole, plus an additional $2 million in punitive damages for fraud and emotional distress. Your Honor, please. David tried to stand, but Cole yanked him back down. I'm still not finished. Judge Henley said, Mrs. Navarro will retain full ownership of her company, her grandmother's estate, and all marital assets. You, Mr. Alaron, will leave this marriage with precisely what you brought into it. Absolutely nothing. She picked up her gavel. Additionally, I am forwarding this entire file to the district attorney's office for criminal prosecution. You are facing charges of grand theft, fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. This court is adjourned. The gavel came down like a gunshot. Bailiff, please escort Mr. Pavlov, Alaron into custody pending arraignment. 2 bailiffs moved toward David, who had gone completely limp, as they pulled him to his feet and began reading him his rights. He turned to look at me one last time. The arrogance was gone. All that was left was a desperate, hollow confusion. The look of a predator who couldn't understand how the prey had turned the tables. Elena, he called out, his voice cracking as they led him away. Elena, please, we can work this out. I love you. I stood up slowly, feeling the strength return to my legs. No. David, I said, my voice clear and carrying across the room. You loved my money. There's a difference. As the courtroom doors closed behind him, Jenna put her hand on my shoulder. It's over, she said softly. You're free. I looked at the empty chair where my husband had sat. For the first time in 3 years, I could finally breathe again. My grandmother had taught me that a woman should never depend on anyone else for her security. She was right. But she also taught me that true strength isn't about never falling. It's about how you rise. And in that moment, I felt like I could touch the sky. Justice isn't just about what happens in a courtroom. It's about finding your voice when someone has tried to silence you. If you've ever felt small, or underestimated, or had to fight for what's yours, let me know in the comments. Your story matters. And if this one resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share. You never know who needs a reminder that their strength is waiting to be unleashed.